Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining Photo Mentor TV tonight and every Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. If this is your first time watching, this show was created to encourage, educate, and mentor new photographers, all to learn how to see like an artist. I'm Jeff, and tonight Lee asked me to help because tonight's show will be different and comes unexpected, but I think you'll find it powerful and worth your time. This has been an extremely hard week for many people, not only for Lee, but really the whole photography world, because they've lost an extremely talented artist and masterful landscape photographer, Lee's good friend, Frank Lee Ruggles. Tonight we honor the work and life of a true creative behind the lens. If you've ever taken even a glimpse of Frank's massive body of work, in a moment you will find images that are expressive, intense, intricate, and revealing. Frank's love of photography, the outdoors, his passion for our national parks has been his mission since being named National Parks Photographer from 2007 to 2011. His dedication to sharing and preserving our country's resources, especially for others to experience and all learn from, came through in vivid detail through his work. So tonight we want to introduce you to a man who was truly one of a kind, a rare and spectacular kind, I might add. Lee's friend Frank was more so a husband, an extraordinary human being, and an unendingly talented photographer who suddenly last week at only the age of 54 is gone way too soon. It's only fitting to share a few minutes of an interview that Lee did with Frank in April of 2020. And as you're about to see firsthand, he lived and filmed life to its fullest. In this interview, Frank captures the essence of not just taking a picture, but taking that moment with you. He said, "I never want to take a picture of what some place looks like, but what it feels like." Frank's words embody how Lee is mentoring his students to see more than aperture or shutter or ISO, but how Frank talked about the day when he started to see like an artist. Earlier today, many friends and family came together to lie Frank Lee Ruggles to rest. It's understandable that Lee wants to honor his friend, and if you'll make time tonight to really listen and watch, I promise you, this interview will teach you, inspire you, and it will enlighten you. His work will continue to light up the horizon with passion and creativity. We know that. Frank's life work, his love, will take you places that you've never been before. This is Frank Lee Ruggles.
Anyone who is an avid photographer or collects landscape photography certainly has heard of Ansel Adams. He is widely known for his black and white images of the American West. He grew up as a photographer through his early work as a member of the Sierra Club and was later contracted with the United States Department of Interior to make photographs of the national parks. Ansel Adams has influenced the work of many photographers, and especially those of us who took up large format film cameras such as 4x5 and 8x10 format. One young man who was particularly struck by Adams' work was Frank Lee Ruggles. In 1989, when Frank left the life of a paratrooper for the 82nd Airborne, he picked up a Minolta X700 film camera. Little did he know this would change the future direction of his life. Frank's love of the outdoors, combined with his new interest in photography, was right in line with that of Adams. Adams' passion for the preservation of the national parks and the adventure of traveling around the country was something that resonated with Frank. It is not uncommon for new photographers to take up landscape photography. There is plenty of subject matter and do not require lighting or fancy equipment. But for Frank, he quickly realized his experience and training as a paratrooper were invaluable when hiking difficult terrain. This also filled the excitement he missed rappelling down mountains or buildings or jumping out of perfectly good airplanes. Fast forward 20 years and Frank's career is nothing short of amazing. Not only has he worked for a wide range of commercial clients and multiple government agencies, but his work hangs in galleries and private collections across the country. One achievement he can't even believe himself is the honor of holding the same unique position as Ansel Adams himself. From 2007 through 2010, Frank Ruggles was named the official photographer for the National Park Service. His position as eminent photographer for the Park Service took him on a journey that included travels to over 150 parks in 50 states. This year, 2020, marks a significant time for the work of Ansel Adams. Not only does this happen to be the lifespan of an average American, but also is the 79th anniversary of when Adams presented his photographs to the Secretary of Interior. Because of Frank's passion for the national parks, he has taken 18 months off of his regular photography and invested significantly in a special project. The project is called 79 Years. It is dedicated to determine what changed since Adams' original photographs were presented to the Department of Interior. While Adams left copious notes on the dates and times of his 171 photographs, there is no easy way to determine exactly where he set his tripod on the ground to make his images. So, from April 2019 through October of 2020, Frank will be traversing the American West in his Jeep to investigate, discover, and map out the exact locations in Ansel Adams' 1941 portfolio. I'm proud to call Frank a friend, and we have known each other for almost 15 years. But for those of you who dream of being a fine art or landscape photographer, there's one thing I've realized about Frank that has made him a success. Well, actually two things. First, it is obvious he's an extremely talented photographer. But the most important attribute is his determination. I refer to Frank as the James Brown of photography, and that is because he is the hardest working man I know in the industry. Frank's love of the outdoors, combined with his passion for photography, has resulted in a wonderful body of art that anyone would be proud to own.
You know, that was the first time that I saw that promo video that you just showed. So that was kind of cool. I would almost like to say, can we just leave it right there? Because it makes me look pretty good and kind of covers everything.
Well, let me give you the backstory on that. I was totally stressed out about that. I only finished that about a couple of hours ago. I had somebody, a professional announcer, do the script for me, read the script for me, but he didn't get it to me in time. So I couldn't wait. And so I only started on it this morning or this afternoon, and I was totally stressed that I was not going to get it done and I was not going to have it. It's something I wanted to have to kind of lay the groundwork for your work. And so, yeah, I've only seen it a couple times myself, so glad you enjoyed it.
It looks really good. Two things I want to say about that. Number one, you keep calling me the James Brown of photography. I always thought that was because of my dancing. So my feelings are a little hurt. But also, you said that I was named the photographer for the National Park Service. And I just want to be honest, I worked with another great photographer named Jon Reed, who came onto the project I was on, the digital imaging project. He came on a couple years later. We ended up having more budget, and we brought on a second guy. So I never want to claim that I was the only guy. I was one of, two guys who were brought on as photographers. And Jon and I finished the project together. And Jon has gone on to be a great photographer in Las Vegas. And he is, just doing great stuff out there in the commercial world. And I sort of fell in love with the national parks and just kind of got stuck there. So I'm still in the national parks about 40 weeks a year.
Well, that was correct, though, and the number of years you were there from how?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Yeah. And what was your role as park photographer, or one of the roles? I guess you probably did a lot of different things.
I was the lead photographer for the digital imaging project. And a lot of people don't understand how the Park Service works with photography. They sort of would imagine you have, a fleet of photographers working for the Park Service, or at least one chief photographer. And they don't do that. About once every 20 years or so, they get enough budget to do what they call a big works project. And my project was the digital imaging project. And that meant they were going to send us around and take the first official digital images of the national parks. So each park I was assigned to, the park superintendent would choose 300 images at each park and say, this is what I want. Now, it could have been anything: landscapes, buildings, historic sites, I shot cannons. We photographed the inside of the Statue of Liberty. And sometimes I got to shoot something that nobody ever gets to see, which is probably the coolest thing I ever did. I got to go into the basement of these national parks and I got to see the secret artifacts that are too delicate to put on display. But it's also cool that people can get to see them. So over the course of our project, we produced 80,000 images for the national parks. And to date, that makes our team the most prolific team for the national parks. Second place was George Alexander Grant. He was the chief photographer for the National Park Service for 40 years. And he did 40,000 images in 40 years. We did 80,000 images in 4 years. So take that, George. We whooped you.
That's amazing, and it is kind of interesting. I've heard you talk many times about the basements of some of these parks and the archives and the things that they have available that people wouldn't have any idea are available or not necessarily shown on a regular basis. And your job, part of your job, was to photograph some of them and document them. Correct?
We were to photograph them, and what's cool about that is every time I was photographing something, I thought about young people. You know, I think education is, you know, the cornerstone of our civilization. And I thought about as when I was a kid growing up in Ohio, and we would go on field trips, and I could tell you every park and everything about Ohio because that's where our field trips were. But I can't tell you anything about California or Nevada or Utah or even Kentucky. So when I got to photograph Abraham Lincoln's life mask, like literally hold his life mask in my hands and photograph it from all the different angles and then present that to a place where school kids from all across America could look at that and learn about, you know, Abraham Lincoln and his life and legacy. It was like we were creating virtual field trips for every school in America. And now kids from Ohio could take a field trip in California. And they could go down to the secret basement and they can learn all the things that nobody would ever get to see otherwise. So if I died tomorrow and that's my legacy, I'm pretty happy with that.
Very cool. Very cool. So I've got a couple of questions here. If you don't, can we take a couple of questions? Is that all right? Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. I've got a question. This is a common one from as being a fellow photographer. And Jacob asked, have you ever experienced photographer's block? And if so, how do you get past that slump?
Oh, Jacob, I get that all the time. You would think it would be easy pickings and low-hanging fruit to go out to some of the most beautiful places on earth, the Grand Canyon or Glacier National Park or Death Valley, and just have a million scenes in front of you. But once you've seen these places a bunch of times, you can sort of get that block that you're talking about. And how I break it is I will do the one thing that's hardest for a photographer to do. This is my big secret. Are you ready? I put my camera down and I spend the day not taking pictures.
Really?
The time I spend not taking pictures is more important to my creative juices than the time I'm actually holding a camera.
Well, I know you're a musician, and I see that would also be an inspiration. Music is a very good inspiration for different things. And so for you, maybe you get some inspiration from that. I don't know. Is that just relaxing and kind of a change of scenery?
Well, anybody who knows me knows I'm a little bit of a busybody. So I'm not the sit at the edge of the lake for 3 hours and just stare into nothingness. I'm not that kind of guy.
Yeah, you go out and
so
build
I'm always
decks.
Yeah. But even when I'm on the road, and I do about 40 weeks a year in the national parks, even when I'm on the road and it's after sundown and I've done my shooting for the day and I'm in my camper, I still have to pick up my guitar every day and play guitar for an hour because I can't stop creating. And I find there's these incredible threads of creativity that go between photography and music back and forth, whether I'm just listening to it or whether I'm actually making music. And it's turned out the last year I spent on the road doing research for the 79 Years Project, I decided to write a song about every stop that I made. And one of these days I'll do a proper recording and put something out for people to hear. But if you guys follow me on Facebook, you'll notice that every once in a while, about once a week, I'll make a little 3-minute video and show you the new song of the week from wherever I am. It's amazing how much photography and music are tied together. I mean, it turns out it's not just me. Ansel Adams was also a great musician. In fact, he wanted to be a concert pianist. A lot of people don't know that. That was his dream when he was growing up. But his fingers were too short. And he realized that he did not have a future to be a great concert pianist. So he sort of left that dream behind and picked up a camera and became the legend that he is.
Yeah, and we're fortunate because of it, I believe. So here's kind of related. You mentioned being from Ohio earlier. Clinton says he's from Ohio, and he wanted to know when you first discovered your love of photography and what was your first real camera.
When I was in high school, I was in the ROTC program. I was going to be a soldier for life. In fact, that was my only plans from the time I was about 6 years old. My mom wore combat boots. My dad was a World War II hero. So my family, we served. We served in the military. That's what we did. And I was going to be a lifer. You know, there was no plan B for me. And I joined the 82nd Airborne Division. And I was pretty good at it. And I planned on being a soldier for life, but that's not how life works. I had a bad parachuting accident, and the 82nd Airborne invited me to leave jump status and offered me a job after I got hurt. I said I was no longer combat effective. They said I could go work at the gym passing out basketballs, and that was just not going to happen. So I decided to leave the Army and try being a civilian, and I was terrible at it. Gosh, I was really bad. And like all great stories, Lee, and you know this lady, my life changed the day of the girl, and she happened to be a photographer. She had just graduated college and with a photography degree. And our first date that we went out on was so lousy and boring that she told me if I ever wanted to go out with her again, that she insisted that we did what she wanted to do on the second date. And when I showed up the next morning, that doesn't sound like
Lisa at all. I don't know where that comes
no.
from.
She said, "You meet me in Charleston, South Carolina, at the Battery at 7:00 in the morning." And if anybody knows that town, it's a beautiful, scenic town. So I met her down there, and she came bopping down the sidewalk with a Nikon camera hanging around her neck, and she said, "Hey, we're going to do pictures today." And I had never, outside of some work in the Army, I had never really touched a camera. But she. You know, we went around all day. She showed me how to meter. She showed me how to focus and take pictures. And we took pictures of each other all day in Charleston. And then it got really good because we went back to her place. And it's not what you think, Lee, because she had a darkroom set up in her house. And she told me how to take the film out of the camera and take the film and turn them into negatives. And then take the negatives and put it in the enlarger. And we shine I shined the first picture I ever made on a piece of paper and then put it in the developer, and her face appeared right in front of me. Like it was a picture of her. And I immediately fell in love with photography.
To see that first image come up like that is magic. So many people have had that experience.
That's the exact word I used at that moment to describe it, Lee. I looked at her and I said, God, you know, I had been lamenting all day how much I missed the military, because I always saw myself as the guy wearing the white hat. I was born to serve. I was born to serve and serve my fellow man and protect my country. And here it was, I wasn't allowed to do that anymore. But now I saw this magic happening in an enlarger in a darkroom. And I said, this is magic. How is there a way I can take this magic and serve my country? Like, can I like go photograph the national parks or something? This is on my second date. And she said, you mean like Ansel Adams? And I said the dumbest thing I've ever said in my whole life.
Who's he?
I said, who is she? Never heard of her. Who is this lady, Ansel Adams? She's like, oh, look, dummy. And she went to her bookshelf and she got me 3 books: the camera, the negative, and the print.
Yep.
And she said, look, dummy, just read these. And I read those and I fell in love with Ansel Adams. And I declared about 3 weeks later, I said, I'm going to be the next Ansel Adams.
Mm.
And she said, don't ever say that out loud again.
Wow.
That's not a thing that people get to say. And first of all, you never will be. And she was right. I said, but I want to photograph the national parks. I want to be the national park photographer. She said, well, look, you have no education. You have no background in this, whatever, don't get out over your skis on this. You're welcome to try. So imagine my surprise in 2007 when we're hiking through the George Washington National Forest. And my phone rings, and it's Alice Newton from the National Park Service saying, you're the next eminent photographer for the national parks. I was overjoyed. I made a dream come true.
Wow.
So that's how I got started. The first camera was the X700. To finish Jacob's question, I ran off to a pawn shop and I sold some stuff and bought a Minolta X700. And I used it for probably the first 10 years.
Wow. So Scott, along that same line, Scott wants to know, because you've been following in Ansel Adams's footstep, and obviously you've researched a lot of his work and his because of the 79 Years Project. Is there anything about him that you learned that you maybe didn't know before, or that surprised you about him?
I learned that he's a lot like me, or I'm a lot like him in a lot of ways. I had heard of the mural project. Lisa and I went to an exhibit after we moved to Washington, D.C. at the Corcoran Gallery of Ansel Adams' work, or maybe it was Leibowitz or somebody, but I got this book, The Ansel Adams in the National Parks, and it tells the story of the mural project and how Ansel was, went out and shot the national parks, but it's all wrong. Almost everything in this book is wrong.
What do you mean by that?
But I didn't. Well, the book says that, the United States government went and tracked down the great Ansel Adams and asked him to be part of the mural project. And that wasn't the case at all. It was his idea. Ansel Adams is the guy who pushed this forward. In fact, he didn't go to the Department of Interior first. He first went to the Department of Labor and said, look, I know we're in Reconstruction. This is 1939. And, you're building all these beautiful buildings in Washington, D.C., and you're going to put murals in them. And I want to include photography in that. And the Department of Labor told him to go pound sand, basically. They wrote him a letter back in no uncertain terms that we have no interest whatsoever. So he went just down the street to the Department of the Interior, and he asked and he begged and he almost forced this project into life. And, he got pushback a lot of times, but he didn't give up. He just said, I have this idea. I want to see it through. I want to see it through. And I sort of see that I didn't know any of this when I started this project. I just made this project up about 4 years ago, and people told me, no, it can't be done. And I said, no, I want to see it through. And then to get into searching to learn that Ansel Adams was the guy who actually made this happen. And one of the reasons that he was photographing some of the things he did is because he was re-photographing. I just learned this. He was re-photographing Timothy O'Sullivan's shots from 75 years earlier. So Ansel Adams was almost doing a 79 Years project himself.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's amazing.
I have a great researcher out in Arizona named Paul Vanderveen, and he is digging through the archives and reading Ansel's letters and his diary and all of the correspondence from the National Archives back and forth. And we're learning all these crazy things about how unlikely this project was for Adams to do, the mural project, how he willed it into existence and made it happen, and then went out and was just kicking butt on it. And then World War II breaks out. The Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor, and they say, gosh, we're sorry, man. We just don't have any money for photo projects right now. And they pulled the rug out from under him. And it just broke his heart that he tried. He said, I'll do it for free. They said, no, we can't. We don't have any funding for this project whatsoever. And they packed up most of these images. They hung 2 of them in the Department of the Interior. And the rest of them were packed up and put away for years at the National Park Service. Then they went to the Department of Interior and then finally landed at the National Archives, where people didn't even really see them or look them or at them or study them until about 1987 when they reemerged and people started taking a look at this body of work. And that's where it all started for me when I learned about that body of work, because after spending years, 20 years out on the National Park Trail, I recognized these places that he photographed. I recognized a lot of the scenes, you know, especially in Glacier National Park. And Lee, I got to tell you, it's incredible. Half the pictures, nothing has changed. Like the ruins of Mesa Verde, not a stone's out of place. That's incredible to me.
Wow.
That's such a win for conservation. And then you look at the glaciers in Glacier National Park, and there used to be 100 of them in 1941, and now there's only 20.
Hmm.
So a lot has changed. And I said, you know what? They should do another project like this. I say what everybody says. They should go do a new project. And then I realized what I always talk about in my lectures, there is no they. There is no magic they that goes and does things. If you want something done, you got to do it yourself.
Yeah.
So I started getting this idea to go out and just re-photograph every one of those pictures, shot for shot, on the same camera, using the same. I got a Deerdorf back here. There's a Deerdorf 8x10 camera and a Corona View 5x7 camera that I'm having rebuilt even as we speak. And I'm going to use the same camera on this exact 79th anniversary. So the sun is in the same place in the sky and the shadows match up. And then when we look at this body of work, his body of work and my body of work, and we can compare them, we will be able to determine what we've lost and what we've managed to save. And I think that's important to know.
One of the things that you were telling me was that in doing this project, the difficulty was people know what the park is he photographed, but they don't know exactly where. And you were explaining to me about the cactus and some things like that. So how are you able to determine the exact location of where those photos were taken?
Well, number one, I have a secret weapon, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But that was one of the biggest revelations about this is my friend Paul out in Arizona pulled Adams' exposure cards from the field. He took notes. There's actually a form he would fill out: the aperture, shutter speed, time of day, what film he was using, what lens.
You mean his EXIF data?
Yeah, basically, yeah. It was exactly like that. He would write with terrible handwriting, but he would write down everything. The only thing he didn't record was his location. So if he was shooting in the Grand Canyon, he would write down South Rim. Okay, the South Rim, if you walk the whole thing, the trail that goes all along the edge is about 205 miles.
Wow.
And that doesn't work. Like, he didn't say where he was. So now I have to try to find where on earth he was standing exactly, like the 3 foot by 3 foot square. And when I got out on this project and I'm walking the edge of the Grand Canyon, literally holding this book, and I'm holding it in front of my face, walking down the Grand Canyon, looking at pictures going, does that match the horizon? And I'm holding this book in front of my face, trying to match I realize that I have been outmatched by my own ambitions. So I had to call in a secret weapon, and his name is Leland Melvin, the NASA astronaut, because I knew if I'm going to find out where each one of these 150 spots is, I'm going to need to use some science. And the brightest scientist I know is Leland Melvin. He's got 4 PhDs. He's freaking brilliant. He's a great photographer, and we are good friends. So when I thought of somebody to go with me, I said, gosh, I really need your help. Would you be willing to traipse around the national parks with me? He said, when do we start? And it's been great to work with him on this, and his insight on how to find things, and the fact that we're going to go out together and find some more of these spots is a really exciting proposition to me.
That's really cool. I've met Melvin, and you're right, he's a delight. He's a wonderful man. He's very smart and just very giving and very generous.
But he's got an intuition about him too. And what I like about Leland and I is that our mission statement melds together. You know, this begins and ends as a conservation project. I'm a conservationist by heart, and I want to make a difference when it comes to the conservation and preservation of our national parks. It's really important to me. But I also understand that we've had very similar messaging over the last 40 years about how we talk about conservation and how we show people what has happened. We present charts and graphs and things like, it's even for somebody who, like me, who really loves it, it's hard to understand. But then you got somebody like Leland Melvin who can make the science understandable, and we can show people in pictures what has changed. And that takes all of the ambiguity out of it. It's, you know, now we can talk about conservation, not in the abstract, but in real terms. This was then, this is now, this is what has changed. And I think people will believe their own eyes. And this is a new way to approach conservation that's fun and not, you know, we're not going to wag our fingers at anybody.
And so has he been using his use of satellite knowledge? I mean, how does he pinpoint it? I'm not asking for exact details, but how is he contributing to finding these locations?
Well, part of the equation is looking at maps from overhead to try to linear picture to a horizontal picture. If he and who has spent more time staring at the Earth from above than an astronaut who went on multiple shuttle missions to the space station and stared at the Earth and took amazing pictures, by the way, from above. And when we're looking at maps together, he has an intuition about, if you're seeing this peak and this peak, he must have been standing here. And we use trigonometry, and that's a scary word to me, but not to him.
So Amanda wants to know, what's the most difficult photo you've taken for the 79 Years project, and why?
Well, two things. Number one, my screen is frozen, so I hope you guys can still see me.
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay, good. My screen's frozen. I hope everybody can see me out there. I look like this.
Hang on, I'll grab a freeze frame and put that up for you. No, you're still doing fine.
Good. That's the most difficult picture to find so far. We haven't started the actual photos yet. I'm still in the research phase. So the one that really was rocking my world a little bit was in Saguaro National Park. Adams took pictures of 4 cactus, just 4. And in 2 of them, it's just a cactus against a blue sky. So I've got to go find the cactus that Adams photographed against the blue sky out of 1.4 million cactus in that park. So by means of deduction and reasoning and looking at some historical maps and things like that, I think I have found the most elusive one. The one cactus out of 1.4 million that he photographed with 7 arms that faces southwest and all that. The only problem is I can't trust myself, so I have to take Leland out there with me to verify, because I'm not a scientist, and I need a scientist to apply some scientific method to make sure I'm on the right track.
Yeah, because with the cactus, it's not like you have a geological reference. Right? It's just
arms. It's just arms against the sky. It's crazy. It's a beautiful. I'm gonna hold this up here. It's this picture here.
Oh wow!
So it's just arms against the sky, and how does one find that? And it took a lot of thinking to do, but I believe I have found it. I did some test shots. I've taken it back, and Leland and I have looked at it, and he said the only way we can really know is to go there and look and apply some scientific methods. So thank God I'm friends with an astronaut. That's all I know. And he's a lot of fun to hang out with. Leland and I own farms near each other in Virginia. And we just went out recently and we got matching tractors. So we have we have a lot of fun together. We're both the gentleman farmers and photographers and conservationists and Ansel Adams fans all rolled up together.
Matching
So
tractors. That's classic. I love that.
Mine's bigger.
Yeah, of course. Here's a question from Mike. Mike Walgren asks, on the 79-year project, you're likely to experience some weather that's significantly different than the original shot. How will that affect what you're able to recreate the image? By the way, let me make a comment before Frank answers that. And that is that I'm always making fun of Frank. I love teasing him because I'm a studio photographer and Frank is a landscape photographer. So he'll post these pictures of these tents. He's sleeping out in this little tent in the desert for a week, or he's in snow, these crazy environments. And I just get a kick out of it because there's no way that I could do that. But boy, he'll hang in there. And so weather is not a deterrent. I've seen him wait and wait and wait to get the shot.
Well, I think we're going to be doing a lot of that in the 79 Years Project. I think there's going to be a lot of challenges, physical challenges. The cameras I'm carrying, I'm not only carrying the 8x10, but also the 5x7 camera, and I'm sponsored by Ricoh. I'm a brand ambassador for Ricoh cameras, so I'll be shooting with the Pentax 645Z as well. So my backpack is getting pretty close back to combat load back when I was a paratrooper, as far as weight. So there's going to be some challenges. But to answer Mike's question about the weather, my pursuit, Mike, on this project is simply the truth. So if Ansel Adams shot on October 14th at 3:38 p.m., I'm going to shoot the same day, October 14th at 3:38 p.m. Now, if he had a beautiful sunny day and I'm in a pouring down rainstorm, I'm going to give myself 3 days on each side. So I want to take the actual 79th picture, the perfect anniversary picture, but I also want to bring back pictures that are helpful to tell this story of environmental changes and environmental and conservation successes. So I want to be true to the parameters of the contest, but I also want to bring back something that is helpful to our mission of conservation. And if I have to wait 3 days for the skies to open up and I get a clear shot, I'll do that as well. Luckily, this is my project. So I don't have a boss on this, and I don't have anybody else setting up any rules. And that allows me to bend the rules a little bit if I need to, because at the end of the day, I want to bring home a body of work that people can look at and understand what's going on. And I want them to see what has changed, not in an arbitrary 250 years. You always hear that in 250 years, Miami's going to be underwater or something like that. I want to say, look, man, this is what has changed in one person's lifetime. This is what's going to change in your lifetime. And then ask the question, okay, this is what has changed. This is what will happen while you're alive. Now, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do to promote conservation and preservation? What is your role going to be now that you've seen the truth? And I'm going to leave it at that. I don't want to scold anybody. I don't want to yell at anybody. I just want to show them the truth. So that's how I'm going to approach that.
Well, a question that I think you and I have talked about earlier off air was the same one that Bob had, and that was, what's the output of the project going to be? How are people going to be able to see these images?
I'm in conversations right now with a major publishing company that this will end up being a book. I can guarantee you that it will be a book. And because of Adam's work with the National Park Service is public domain, we will have access to reproduce these images in a side-by-side comparison book. So we'll have a before and after coffee table book that people can see. Of course, it'll be an interactive site on my website, and after the project is over, I'm hoping to create some sort of app that kids can use so they can, as they're walking through a national park, they can pull up pictures from where they are and look at historical pictures and then go reshoot them and do their own mini 79 Years projects. So after the project is over and that we've had the book, I'm hoping to film this project so I can show people the trials and tribulations of making this happen. But after this is all over, I hope that the project continues, but with a new generation of photographers, and that we have that it just doesn't end in July of 2021. I don't want it to be over. I want this to be a new thing that people can do. Go re-photograph historic sites so that we can create a record of then and now.
Well, you know what happens on a lot of these things. They get legs and they grow on their own, and we never know what's going to happen with them. So sometimes you start something, it goes this way, it goes that way, and it sounds like this is something that, to me, has legs and could go on to be something you never even imagined.
Well, you know, we've talked about this all the time. Sometimes maybe to a fault, I'm a dreamer, and I have big plans and big ideas, but my real hope for this project, Lee, is that somehow this inspires kids to pick up cameras, whether it's their cell phone or whether they pick up a digital point and shoot or a DSLR or even a film camera. It doesn't really matter. But I want kids to pick up cameras and start recording now through their eyes, and fall in love with the nature the way that I have, because we don't have a John Muir right now. The great conservationist John Muir, we don't have one. We need a new John Muir. Wouldn't it be cool that if through this project and getting kids involved, if we could discover the next John Muir, and it happens to be one of those kids that saw this project and picked up a camera because they were jazzed about photography or conservation, and then became the next great conservation voice of our time. That's my real dream out of this whole thing.
Well, I think I don't know if you and I have actually talked about this, but I have a feeling we have a similar experiences, and that somebody in our youth helped us along, kind of gave us some encouragement, and we could have easily, I'll speak for myself, I don't know you, but I could have easily gone this way, but because someone took a little bit of time and helped me and encouraged me, I went this way, which turned out to be the right way to go. And I think that's the same kind of thing you're saying, is that photography is a wonderful creative outlet, even if you don't do it as a career. And it's something you can do your entire life. I mean, there's no age limit.
No, and it's a passport. It's a passport to go see and do things. And that's another reason I'm doing this project. I want to celebrate Ansel Adams, of course, his life and legacy. What bums me out is when I tell people about this project and I say, hey, I'm going to go re-photograph Ansel Adams' 1941 portfolio shot for shot using the same camera. And about 70% of the people stare at me blankly and say, I have no idea who that is. And that just breaks my heart.
Oh.
So I want to do this to celebrate Ansel Adams and introduce him to a whole new generation of people. But look, I'm doing this for all of us, all photographers. I want to celebrate photography as an art form. You know what's ironic about the whole mural project is one of the reasons that Adams was so intent on getting murals, photo murals, next to the painted murals in these public buildings is because back in 1941, photography was the redheaded stepchild of the photo world. It wasn't considered on par with sculpture and painting and watercolors and things. It was thought of as a lesser art form. And he said, no, damn it, photography is important. And he was right. And photographers have been there for every major event that's happened since about 1860. Everything that has happened, there's been a photographer there. And it's when you think of a historic event, you often conjure up the photos or the film taken by a videographer or a movie maker or a photographer. That think about the Hindenburg crashing. That wouldn't be as real to us if we didn't have pictures and video of that. Think about the JFK assassination. It wouldn't be as real to us if it wasn't filmed and photographed. And think about John saluting. If you just heard that story, it would go in one ear and out the other. But when you see that picture, it makes that moment come alive and makes it last forever. And I think photography also still gets pushed to the back burner a little bit. So through this project, I'm hoping to celebrate not just Adams and myself and the national parks. I want to celebrate photography and photographers in general because we're doing good work out here. I have so many talented friends, Lee, you know most of them. There's people out here doing really, really good work, and I want to bring photography to the forefront. Maybe just using this as a different type of messaging, but I'm doing this for all of us, actually.
Well, I think that's great. Very ambitious, and it goes back to something you said early on when you first started, and that was your heart to serve. And that's really what this is all about. It's not about you. It's not about serving other people and helping them in the next generation.
It is. This is a redemption for me. That's another thing that Adams and Leland and I all have in common, is that photography was not any of our plan A. Adams was going to be a great musician, a great concert pianist, and he had to reinvent himself and become a photographer, and his plan B was better than his plan A. Leland Melvin was going to be an NFL star. In fact, he was drafted into the NFL, and he was a great athlete. And he spent his entire childhood getting ready to be this great athlete, although he took up photography as a young age as well. But when he got injured in a preseason game and his career ended, he reinvented himself. And his plan B was, okay, I can't be an NFL superstar, I'll go be an astronaut. And for me, I was supposed to be a soldier for life. And that didn't work out. My plan B was, I'm going to go photograph the national parks and try to protect my country that way. And my plan B certainly has been better and I think more impactful than my plan A. And I think all three of us could say that. And it's one of those things that it's a recurring theme through a lot of my friends in the photographic world, that they didn't start out as photographers, but they were drawn to it. And it has been something that has enriched their lives in ways that words can't express. Thank goodness they can take pictures to express them, right?
Yeah, that's a great way to phrase it and to position it, because it is that way. And I know personally, for my personal photography, I can be in a bad mood. I can take my camera. I can go walk around the neighborhood and come back in a completely different mindset.
Absolutely.
So,
it's a passport. It's a time machine too.
Yes.
It can transport you back to an awesome moment in your life. Photography is just magic.
So Anthony has an interesting question. What parks outside the 79-year project would you like to photograph that you've never been to?
There are 419 parks in the United States National Park Service system, including the national monuments and the national rivers and seashores and battlefields and things like that. I have done 338 out of the 419, and my goal is to finish the 419 before I die. That's one of my many bucket list things. But I haven't finished the Alaska parks, and that's so Lake Clark and Wrangell St. Elias are two that I really, really want to go do. In fact, my reward, Anthony, to myself is if I finish this Ansel Adams project, this 79 years thing, if I finish it and it's a success, my personal reward is to go to Alaska and spend about a month in Wrangell St. Elias National Park, which is our largest national park, and go get lost and see what I can find. Hopefully I find myself.
So you certainly have a big bucket list, and there's certainly a lot of stuff to photograph. But Andrew wants to know if you've ever traveled outside the United States and photographed other parks in other countries.
I have done the Alberta parks in Canada, Yoho, Kootenay, and Banff, and Jasper. Those have been great. I've photographed some national parks in Ireland, and that's it. The United States is such a big country, and there's so much to see. I figure if I ever finish that, I'll get outside the United States and work on that. But remember, this begins with me back in 1981, when the first time I raised my hand and took an oath as an ROTC cadet is service. So I feel like every time I go out and I do a project like this, whether it's working for the government, and I've worked with under every presidential administration since Reagan, all the way through Obama in some capacity. doing either soldering or photography or something like that. So I associate photography with my personal service to my country. So I would almost feel like I'm not betraying my country, but I have so much work here to do to protect my country. I can't take my eye off the ball until it's completely done. And I kind of feel like it probably will never be completely done. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're a little over time, but I think we got a few more minutes. A question that came up is about gear. Now, you and I think both have been doing this long enough that we realize we already have more gear than we possibly could ever use, and buy more. And by the way, before I let you go, I want you to tell me a little bit about the darkroom behind you. But I think I can speak for myself. I'm sure you agree that buying better equipment doesn't make you a better photographer. I know I've gone out. I had to have this lens, or I had to have this camera, and I come back and I start shooting with it, and I'm like, darn, my photos still suck. I guess it's not the camera. So, but having said that, tell me a little bit about the cameras that you're using now. I know you've this project has really brought you more into doing film, but I know you have shot digital for years, and that's what you did with the Park Service. So tell me just briefly about the kind of cameras and equipment you're using right now.
Well, like you, Lee, I own over 200 cameras, and I've shot with most of them. But my main camera is the Pentax 645Z medium format camera, 50 megapixels. It's got such a beautiful dynamic range to it. What I love about that camera, and I've tried everything. I have literally shot every camera there is. You and I worked at a camera store together, so it wasn't like I couldn't get my hands on everything. But more than any other camera that I've ever photographed with, the Pentax 645Z captures what I see with the naked eye, but not just what it looks like. I never want to take a picture of what something looks like. I want to capture what a place feels like. And the Pentax captures feeling. And I know that's an arbitrary term, but it allows me to communicate the feeling of a place like no other camera I've ever tried. That said, I'm now shooting with the Deerdorf 8x10 film camera, and which is ironic because I quit film 10 years ago and declared to the world that I hated it and I would never do it again. Here I am right in the thick of it.
Never say never, right?
Right. This is the only way I could do this project, is to do it on film. It's the only apples to apples comparison that I could do. And it wasn't my idea. I originally started out this project, I was going to shoot on digital, and somebody said, well, then people will maybe ask if you manipulated the picture or something like that. They said, and I said, okay, so I'll shoot on film. I'll shoot medium format film. They go, well, why don't you shoot large format film? And I said, well, gosh, it's impossible because you'd have to build an entire darkroom and go through all that. But then I remembered, and I got to show you something kind of cool, that there's something really interesting and beautiful and tactile about an 8x10 negative. This is 4 gigapixels.
Wow.
4 gigabytes of information on this, and I can blow these up big. And I find that I like shooting the film now because it's hard. It's really hard. I can't. Sometimes I go 3 months between the time I click the shutter and I see what I got, and that is getting me out of bed every morning. And I'm pretty excited about that. To answer your question, I know we're probably over time. The dark room you see behind us, this is what I'm building out at the new national headquarters of the 79 Years Project. I'm working with Ansel Adams' former assistant, Alan Ross, who lives out in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and he sent us plans and even information about what color to paint the walls. We're trying to make a darkroom inspired by Ansel Adams, to include his layout and the square footage and the color of the walls and where he placed his enlargers and where he put his sinks and all that kind of stuff. We're trying to match that as closely as we can, because if I'm going to shoot with the same camera and the same film in the same day, why not have the same darkroom, right? So that's the deal with the darkroom behind me.
Well, that makes perfect sense. And, the thing about film, I don't miss it. But what I think it does is I like the process. I think the process is important. The slowing down, the only having 12 images, or in your case, one image, two images per, and the idea that, okay, how important is this image? How am I going to invest enough time to photograph this? Is it really worth the time? Nowadays, people are just and they're like, okay, I'll shoot 1,000 pictures and I'll get a couple of them that are good. And you know that's not the way to learn the craft.
What the unexpected part of this whole project, Lee, is that how this has connected me to my roots. And I told you my origin story. I took my first roll of film, this beautiful girl who ended up being my wife. So every time I develop a picture and I stick it in the enlarger and I shine it on a piece of paper and I see that magic happening in the developing tray, it takes me right back to that first picture I ever developed, and my second date with this beautiful girl who became my wife. And it's a reset button every time I do it. And I'm just as jazzed today as I was 27 years ago when I started this whole mess. I can't believe it's been 27 years. That means it's more than half my life. I've been doing photography.
And that goes to what someone was asking earlier. How do you stay motivated, and how do you, and I think that's part of it. You have to be passionate about it, because to get up at 4 a.m. or earlier to be able to catch the sun as it's coming over a mountain or somewhere, you have to really love it. If you don't love it, you'll just go, the weather's not any good, I'll just stay in bed today. That's not going to work.
I love it because of the service of it. Even if it's just sharing pictures on Facebook, which a lot of my friends do, people don't realize how impactful that is. All my friends who are sharing their pictures from around, their travels, when they share a picture of the natural world, they're reinforcing every single day how important, how delicate, and how fragile our natural world is, and we need to protect it every day. So whether they realize they're doing it or not, all my nature photography friends are actually conservationists, and they're all on the same team. We're all doing this together. Whether they're doing it on purpose or not, they're making a big, big difference in the world of conservation.
Okay, so I tell you what, let's, before we go here, let me remind everybody that if you're interested in being entered into the drawing for a copy of Frank's Chasing Light book, here's what you need to do. You need to just either leave a question in the comments section with a Q and a colon in it. I appreciate that. Or you can just leave a comment. You don't have to ask a question if you don't want. Or you can put in #pound 79 years as in the comment section, and that will also enter you. And no matter, any of those people will draw. Frank's going to, oh, thanks, Frank. You're going to give away 3 copies of this book with somebody's signature. We're not sure whose yet, right?
You're not going to get that. This one's completely.
No, wait a minute. What's the deal
down
with that? That's a special edition.
This one, we keep finding about 1 out of 1,000 copies is printed upside down. So I'm keeping these as a collector's edition for my own amusement.
But
great. I just pulled one off the shelf to show people, and all the pictures are upside down.
Wow.
Incidentally, this page, people often ask me what my favorite picture is.
Yes.
It's this one. This is
Why
my
is
favorite
that?
picture I've ever taken. Well, let's see if I can make it.
Is that because you didn't get eaten alive?
Well, people think that this is a picture of a bear. It's really a self-portrait. I had some encounters with that bear over the previous couple of days. It was our last day on Katmai, and I saw him out on the beach, and I decided to crawl on my belly out to get another shot. And I realized as I'm looking through my camera, I'm hiding from a 2,000-pound brown bear behind 5 blades of grass. Like, how stupid am I? This is Frank. This is Frank hiding behind a piece of grass so he can get a picture of a bear. So I decided to focus on the 5 pieces of grass and let the bear be blurry, because that was the moment I was in. That was my Lisa's face moment appearing in the developing tray. It was my sitting on top of Mount Rushmore moment. It was one of those moments that I just really had the self-awareness of just how much I freaking love photography. So that's my favorite picture. It's a self-portrait of me, but you can't see me in the picture. You can only see the bear.
Well, it's an interesting comment because you and I both know that every picture has you in it. In fact, I think Ansel Adams had a quote similar about that there's 2 people in every picture, the person you're photographing and the person behind the lens. The other
every is a self-portrait.
Yep. And the other quote I love about him that I always tell people about is when they talk about photoshopping or making a change, and that he's always saying that the negative was the score and the print is the performance. And I love that because that's getting it in the camera is only half of it. It's making it, putting it on paper or printing it or creating an image out of it and making your vision come to life is what really excites me.
There was a reason that he made 3 books: the camera, the negative, and the print. And he talked about the moment of exposure and then the processing of those negatives to get them to have the usable dynamic range that you're trying to convey the story, and then the time that you spend in the enlarger, putting that negative on paper. There's 3 parts of that. And what made Adams so brilliant is that as he was pointing his camera at a subject, he was already thinking about those other 2 steps.
Yeah.
You know, he was thinking, he was playing 4-dimensional chess before anybody.
Cool.
And I love him for it.
Do you want to go over some of your images, or do you want to call it you think that's good enough? We had some images to look at. Is there any?
Sure. I don't know if anybody's still watching. I have no idea what time it is.
We're all about.
You got me talking about my favorite subject, which
I know.
is me.
We got about 15 minutes here. So tell me about this picture. Can you see this picture right here?
I can, and actually that is not my favorite picture, but that's probably the most important picture in my photographic career, believe it or not, because that's the moment, that's the day, that's the moment, that's the frame where I learned to see. Prior to that, this is when I was working for the Park Service, and I was taking pictures exactly like everybody else was taking pictures. I'd find a pretty scene and I would photograph it, and if there was nothing pretty to photograph, I would assume there was nothing to see. And I was on the Chilkoot Trail in Alaska, out of a remote place we flew into, and went on this long solo hike, and it was nothing but drizzle, and it just irritated me. And I was so mad that I had wasted a half day hiking, knowing that I wasn't going to see anything good. I literally hung my head and walked back. And as I was staring at the ground, I started to see this beautiful foliage on the ground, and I realized that I was looking, but I wasn't seeing. And if I would have just allowed myself to see what was around me, I'm always surrounded by beauty, regardless of the weather. Remember, Lee, there's no such thing as bad weather. There's just different kinds of weather.
I agree.
And that cloudy day allowed me to see this beautiful foliage at my feet. And I snapped 2 pictures of it. And this picture, to remind me to see, is printed 3 by 5 feet, and it hangs on the wall of my cabin. So it's the first thing I see every day when I wake up.
Wow, that's so cool. Real quick, Brenda asked, how does she donate if she has for the 79 Years Project?
Oh, she
doesn't have PayPal.
If you don't have PayPal and you'd like to help me come up with some research money, that's very kind. You could send me a private message, and I could send you a street address if you really wanted to. I don't really need donations at this point. I'm funded, at least for the research part of this, and but I'm dragging a camper across the country, and gas is expensive, or it used to be expensive.
Yeah.
So yeah, send me a private message, and I'll give you a street address.
Now, this looks like a picture of you at Arches. Is that right?
My friend Gary took this picture at Arches, and this is kind of neat. It's just a picture of me, but this is a bucket list item. If you've ever shot large format, you know that crap is really heavy, and you know the hike out to Delicate Arch is challenging. It's a 730-foot vertical climb, over slick rock, and it's hot. And and here I strapped this giant stupid camera on my back, and I went out there, and I actually got surrounded by people. When you break out an 8x10 camera around a bunch of photographers, you're going to get swamped with people wanting to know what's going on. So to get away from everybody, I went behind the arch, and you can't really see to the left of me that there's a 300-foot cliff about 4 feet away from where I'm standing.
It looks pretty steep.
But to get a picture of it is steep and it's slick, and people were nervously watching me shoot. But it was a bucket list item to get a shot of Delicate Arch that was sort of unique on a large format camera. And I was so happy my friend Gary was standing behind me, and he snapped this shot of me, because it's one of those moments I certainly remember when I take the picture, but I didn't realize I was just standing there, probably slack-jawed at the moment that I actually pulled off one of my bucket list items to get a camera out there and get a nice exposure of this iconic National Park Service scene.
Okay, so this looks like a familiar picture.
Yeah, this is a picture. One of the first shots I took when I became really aware of Ansel Adams this is El Capitan at Cathedral Beach. I didn't know that there was a name Cathedral Beach. I just seen this picture hanging above my desk in the National Park Service for 2 years before I got to go to Yosemite. So when I finally went there, I said, I want to go find that spot. And I want to stand where Ansel Adams shot, and I want to pay an homage to the master. So I went to this very spot, and I looked down on the ground, and you know what I saw, Lee?
No.
5,000 potholes, where every other photographer, I won't say jackass,
yeah,
every other photographer had the same idea. And I snapped the picture, but I was sort of disappointed that I was not remotely original. And I turned around, and there was a line of people behind me waiting to stand in the same spot and take the same picture.
Yeah.
So I went back a couple of years later, and I took that picture in a hailstorm, and was able to get a shot that most people would never see, a hailstorm at Cathedral Beach at El Capitan. It's one of my favorite shots.
Well, I know this definitely fits your category, but I know a lot of people, when it's raining, they pack up and go inside. But sometimes when it's rain, you can get the most interesting images because there's not a lot of people out photographing in the rain.
Well, that's true. I was with my boys, the A team. Rudy and Brad and John were with me that day. And that's one of the great things about shooting with that Pentax 645Z, not to sound like a commercial, it's waterproof.
Yes,
so I can shoot with the camera, and I don't have to worry about my equipment getting ruined. And it's little things like that let you get the shot that stands out a little bit among the crowd. Here's a picture of Death Valley. And this is a picture I use to teach. And one of the reasons I like to show people this is because when I explain how to take pictures that people are drawn to, or you want to transport them to a place, you don't take a picture of what a place looks like. You take a picture of what it feels like. And one of the ways that you can transport people to your spot is to include a lot of foreground. And a lot of times we don't do that. We don't include foreground. And people say, why do you do that? And I say, because I want to give the people a place to put their feet when they're looking at my pictures. I want them to have a piece of ground to stand on and look at. So I always include a lot of foreground in my shots like this, so that when the person is there, they can really feel like they're transported to the place. And this is one of those examples that I use to teach all the time.
Well, I think what people forget is that our job as photographer is to lead the viewer, to tell the story. And if I have to wander all over the frame looking to figure out what's important, what I call the hero of the shot, then it doesn't work. And so I love to use foreground or leading lines to be able to draw people to what it is I'm looking for, even for portraits and things like that. So I totally agree. And I know you're really big on foreground. I mean, a lot of your pictures are like that. And especially, like, for example, this one right here. Now, the color version of this one is my most favorite picture you've ever taken. I don't know why. It's just something about it. It's just breathtaking. The color is just so impressive. And that's, yes, it's simple,
The
so to
first
speak.
picture in my,
It's what?
it's the first picture in my book.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. Yeah, it's just a phenomenal image, and I don't know why, but it just definitely speaks to me. So anyway, so tell me the story behind this one.
Well, this is it took me 4 days to take this picture. I've told you this story before. You already know. You're setting me up, Lee. But you know that I was eating breakfast at a place called Henry's in Glacier National Park, and I looked across the parking lot at the boat rental place, and I saw this most amazing light. And I threw down a $20 bill on the table and rushed outside, leaving half a plate of food behind. Now, if you've ever seen, you guys know I'm a big guy. I don't leave food behind, especially corned beef hash. But I left a
Ooh.
whole, like half a meal behind. I rushed out there and I grabbed my camera and I ran to the water's edge, and the light had passed. And I was so mad at myself that I ate breakfast through the sunrise. I was just so mad that I determined I was going to sit there until the sunrise happened again. And it took me 4 more days of sitting in that spot every morning with just me and the mosquitoes. And I sat there and waited and waited and waited for 4 days for the sun to come back. And on the fourth day, it did. And it was better than ever. And when I first posted this picture on Facebook, within a couple hours, I got a phone call from a lady. And she said, I just love this picture so much. I look at it, it makes me cry, and I want to buy it. And I said, well, you can buy it. She said, no, I want to be the only person to ever own that photograph. So I printed it up for her. She bought it, edition number 1 of 1. And she paid me what an edition of 25 would have been.
Mm-hmm.
And with that money, I used to buy my Pentax 645 camera. And that's sort of how I got started with the medium format, is from that picture.
I think that's the only picture you've ever done that with, is it?
That's the only, Miss Lisa, my wife, owns number 1 of every other picture I've taken. It's the only time I've ever sold a number 1. When I fall off a cliff or get eaten by a bear, which we all know is going to happen, Miss Lisa will have all those number 1 editions to sell. That's her. Photographers don't get a 401k when you're self-employed. Right. That's my 401k.
Yeah. Okay, so let's look at just a couple more, and then I'll let you go. Here's this is an interesting one. This is like a beach scene as opposed to your typical landscape that you do.
This is Matador Beach, and I took this just recently. It was on my last trip, and Miss Lisa was with me this day when I took this photograph. And the reason that I like it so much is this is one of those shots. I've been reading a lot about Adams, pre-visualizing what a shot will look like before, when it's completely done, where I was talking, he's 3 steps ahead. And as I was this scene, and it calculated my exposure so that even though, I'm on the shady side of the rock there, I was able to capture the shadow detail without blowing out the sky. And there's, a million combinations of aperture and shutter speed and things that you can do. And I pre-visualized what I wanted to do, and I was able to dial this in and get the picture that I saw in my head. I was able to get that as a print. And so, even though I've been doing this for 27 years, sometimes I still surprise myself when I get something to come out the way I wanted to come out.
Well, there's a good example of contrast ratio or lighting ratio where you're shooting against the sun. Most of the time, that other side of the rock is going to be completely black, or if you're photographing a person in front of a window, and if you can't supplement it with additional light, you have to figure out how to stretch that dynamic range.
Well, this is something that I could never have done in my first year or even my 10th year of photography. It's something that when I got the Pentax 645, I started shooting digital medium format, which is a game changer, by the way. Even the first 2 years with that, I didn't understand the properties of the way that camera captures light well enough. It was only after I put in my 10,000 hours and my 10,000 shots with that camera that I understood how the camera was going to react and the sensor was going to record that scene. And I actually had to shoot that scene, believe it or not, 3.5 stops underexposed.
Really?
That's nothing that you would ever do. That's
Yeah,
stupid.
well, not normally. And yet still
So,
you had that shadow detail.
well, I understood that my Pentax is going to hold at about 3.7 stops under. I'm going to lose everything.
Hmm.
So I gave myself 3.5 stops under as that one sliver of possibility that would work. And here's the thing. I took that picture once. I didn't take 10,000 pictures of that. I pre-visualized it. I knew it was going to work. I knew how it was going to come out. I snapped the picture and we kept hiking. So when it came out and I saw it on the computer and I got it onto a piece of paper, I felt like, aha, I have arrived finally. At 53, I'm finally a photographer.
Oh, that's cool. All right. And what about, this is a beautiful scene. Definitely not your typical in cloud cover. Most people, I assume, would gone home by now. What's the story behind this image?
This is a really famous spot. There's Adams made a very famous image here that called the Clearing Summer Storm. And it was literally the opposite of this. This is an arriving winter storm. So we were in Yosemite National Park, obviously at Tunnel View. And this is such a famous place that they built 2 lots to accommodate all the people that stand there and take pictures. So this isn't a place I hiked along. I hiked 40 feet to get to this spot. But it was me and my friends Brad and Rudy and John and just a handful of other photographers on a pretty awful morning. And we just stood there and watched this storm evolve in front of us. And for just a fraction of a second, we actually had good light. And for hours before and hours after, it just sucked. But for a few minutes, Mother Nature rewarded our perseverance for staying there. And what we have here is almost not a negative of Ansel's picture, but sort of like the rest of the story. The rest of, you saw his picture, and this is what it looks like at the complete opposite time of year, the complete opposite of everything. The arriving winter storm versus the clearing summer storm. So it's kind of a special thing to me.
Well, it's a beautiful picture. And again, if you're using Ansel Adams' term, the zones, the dynamic range between the blacks in that one side of the mountain and the clouds is just phenomenal. It has every grayscale ever made in there, it looks like.
Every once in a while you get a good one.
Yeah.
I'd never enter a photo contest. But I entered this picture in the popular photography or outdoor photographer photo contest, and I won editor's choice. And I was so proud. Hey guys, I won. I won a photo contest and outdoor photographer. And somebody reminded me that that's not fair because I'm a professional. Like, of course, you're a ringer. That's not fair for you to enter contests. So this is the first and only contest I've ever entered for photography.
Well, my definition of the difference, it may not be accurate, of a professional and an amateur means a professional has to shoot, in my case, not yours, what the client wants, but an amateur gets to shoot what they want. So if it's raining that day and they don't want to get up and go shoot, they can just roll over and go back to bed. I can't do that. The client wants me to solve that problem. They don't care that it's raining. That's my difference. I've seen some amazing work from some amateur photographers with just some very basic equipment. So that certainly is not a qualification.
Every time I do a talk at a photography club or a lecture at RAI or something like that, I always say this line, and it's absolutely true. I will always say, I want you guys to remember I'm not the best photographer in the world. And the truth is, I'm probably not even the best photographer in this room. There are amateur hobbyist photographers that are so much better than I am. It'll blow your mind. But, they don't do it full time. They don't do it as a living, and they enjoy it. They maintain that joy of photography every time they go out, and you don't have to sell your photos to be a good photographer. That's not the benchmark of what makes a good photographer. A good photographer is the one that goes out there, and when you snap that shutter, you get those endorphins and you're overcome with joy at the moment that you're in. That's what a good photographer is.
Totally agree.
amateur photographers.
Yeah.
The rest of us were just stressed all the time.
Well, listen, Frank, I think I should probably let you go. I really, really appreciate this. This has been phenomenal. I think as from the based on the questions and the comments, I think everyone really appreciated it and enjoyed it.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I really appreciate it. I know there's a lot of photographer friends out there, and I want you guys to know that I really appreciate you, and I appreciate what you do. And I thank you so much for your support.